So what we saw is that the topic around the strategic Bitcoin reserve gained a lot of traction in the last couple of months. It started with Donald Trump in Nashville at the Bitcoin conference in July 2024, where he pledged to retain the current Bitcoin holdings of the US. And he has in general a pro stance on that topic. After that, Senator Loomis in August 2024 moved quite quickly with the Bitcoin Act of 2024, planning to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin over the next 5 years as strategic reserve. After that, what we saw in September 2024 is the Satoshi Action Fund introducing model legislation. What they're aiming for is actually the promotion of the adoption of the strategic Bitcoin reserve at a state level. What we saw in October 2024, after Trump's election victory, we saw an intensification of the discussions around the strategic Bitcoin reserve, including to retain the seized US assets. In November 2024, the Satoshi Action Fund gained traction, and we saw states like Pennsylvania and Texas actually introducing their own strategic Bitcoin reserve bills. What we saw in December 2024 is that MicroStrategy announced a significant increase in their Bitcoin holdings. And what they achieved with that is that there was an increased interest in Bitcoin as a reserve asset at corporate level. What we saw in January 2025 is Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, actually dismissed the proposal to have Bitcoin as a central bank reserve asset. And she emphasized the need for reserves to be actually liquid, secure, and safe. In that same month, Fidelity Digital Assets actually predicted that more countries, and that includes Brazil and Russia, would actually establish Bitcoins in 2025, and that in order against inflation and currency debasement. And in February 2025, US Congress actually formed a bipartisan working group to develop policies around digital assets. And that was signaling increased governmental focus on currencies. Industry leaders viewed for position in Donald Trump's newly formed advisory council are expected to influence the classification and regulation of digital currencies. And all these discussions and proposals actually set the stage for an ongoing debate around the strategic Bitcoin reserves. Christoph, do you think that we will see the strategic Bitcoin reserve under Trump?
Yeah, first of all, to say if it comes, it's good. Doesn't come, well, also good. Then they have more time to stack sets, right? So in the end, Bitcoiners don't care, actually. And the thing is that, and this is, I think, the most and more interesting question, that the US started a process that they can't stop. Especially, it will happen since Trump's announcement at the Bitcoin 2024 conference in Nashville. He actually started the fear of missing out globally, especially amongst the nation states. And now we see game theory in action. So this is something that can't be stopped anymore, right? And this means that it's not so relevant whether we see the SB on short-term action, for the very simple reason that we are now in this adoption process that can't be stopped anymore.
So, okay, can't be stopped. So what's your opinion? Do you think it's going to come this year?
So this is, of course, a crystal ball question. And what I see, I will answer that with fundamentals. I can't give you a yes and no. If you want to see a yes and no vote, you can obviously go to bidding markets like Poly market. So there the chance is something like 40, 50% that this year will be a strategic reserve. But I will give you a more fundamental answer. Okay. It is a grassroots movement, and hence a grassroots adoption curve. This means people adopting it, you have communities adopting it, municipals, federal states, and then nation states. And what we see right now is we have a lot of action. We've seen that amongst hodlers for the last 10 years, and now we are at a level that actually nation states really consider it and have already set up either laws or bills to pass a strategic reserve, or even beyond that, meaning we have actual federal states and also nation states working with the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So what does it mean? What we see is the more it is adopted amongst private national entities, also corporate entities like companies adopting it to a strategic reserve, the more likely is it that you can't avoid it, or can't circumvent the necessary get something strategically relevant and solid on your balance sheet, like gold or Bitcoin in this new case, right? But to answer your question, whether this year, like the recent bet in Poly Market, just had a quick look, it's 43% likelihood that there will be a US-based strategic reserve, 43%. But again, more important is the fundamentals. And I see the fear of missing out is kickstarted. This can't be changed. And what we see right now, the BRICS states have acted on this announcement because there's a likelihood, and even this likelihood is so relevant for other nation states, during the BRICS state in particular, that they actually started the adoption process. And this, in thinking that through the circle, the next circle, obviously, will be relevant for other nation states because they adopted, they have to adopt it as well. Otherwise, they will lose in the game theory.
So can you actually elaborate a little bit about the game theory? What is the game theory?
Yeah, more than happy to do so. So game theory is the art and science of decision making. And obviously, since individuals are involved, people like you and I are involved in decision making, it is obviously in not 100% rational, a bit erratic process, right? Because we all have rational reasons, we have also irrational reasons or emotional reasons that we can adopt and we bring in decisions, right? So the point behind game theory is that you move quicker, when it comes to Bitcoin at least, that you move quicker than your neighbor, or you potentially are too late. So we all have this age-old fear in our civilization to be too late for whatever you're hunting for, right? And this ages-old fear plays also out in Bitcoin, of course. Yeah.
And how is that relevant for Bitcoin? Can you translate that for us?
So the adoption of Bitcoin is driven by market participants and not by regulators. So what does it mean? To adopt Bitcoin, people vote with their feet and not with the ballot. Okay. What does that mean? You have to actually act. It's not like you vote something or there's some market noise. No, you actually buy Bitcoin or you don't. You vote with your feet, with your money. And this is the reason why I believe that it will work the first time in history, because that Bitcoin is adopted by people and not by elected institutions. It sounds very generic or abstract. What I mean, Bitcoin comes with rules, but it is not ruled by rulers. Rules instead of rulers. Okay, that's the main difference here. And this is the fundamental mindset shift, because there's no one controlling Bitcoin. No one can tell you to adopt Bitcoin. Either vote with your feet, with your money, or you don't. And this is a fundamental mind shift. People have to get into action themselves. Okay. And only if they do, then you see the adoption. And we have seen a lot of adoption during the last 10 years. The recent market report by Breeze shown that we have almost 300% growth rate year over year, especially in the Bitcoin and Lightning transactions, and also their corresponding volumes. And this is an exponential curve that we can see.
So what do you actually mean with no rulers?
Bitcoin has rules, of course, specific or heuristics and algorithms, specific principles and governance in how Bitcoin mining works thermodynamically, but there's no rulers. There's no one controlling the net. So Bitcoin has rules, but no one rules Bitcoin, and self-sovereign people accept rules, but they don't accept rulers that decide for them. You won't change Bitcoin. It will change you, is what Bitcoiners often say, right? And this is true if you have 0.1 Bitcoin or 1 million.
So you can't change Bitcoin, but how are you so sure that BlackRock and co are not going to derail the initial idea of Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a lot discussed in the community. It's exactly this high stake institutional providers and asset managers like Vanguard and BlackRock. And there are two different proof of work in Bitcoin. Now, there's the obvious thermodynamically proof of work in the protocol, and there's the human knowledge proof of work. So you will only invest significant amounts if you have done your personal proof of work, if you really considered the protocol, take your time to deep dive into the specifics economically, technologically, if you, for instance, read the white paper published by Satoshi back in 28. And yeah, this is also part of the game theory, because the people holding Bitcoin have deeply learned about Bitcoin the hard way, and they won't accept a hard forked Bitcoin, hard forked diluted Bitcoin. So what does this mean? If institutions like BlackRock would actually try to hard fork Bitcoin, for instance, to dilute the 21 million hard cap limit, no one who's actually holding Bitcoin has an interest in doing that. So game theory obviously prevents that your Bitcoin base is diluted. Yeah? And yes, even if Bitcoin like 5% or about 1 million of Bitcoin held by like asset managers like BlackRock, even then there is only a tiny likelihood that they will gain adoption with the hard fork, because no one is interested in diluting their assets, right? If I hold Bitcoin, why should I agree with my node and also all other economically relevant nodes? Why should they agree on diluting? So that this is why even with that super large stake, you can't change the rules of the network.
So back to the game theory. What does it actually have to do with the prisoner's dilemma?
So the earlier you are, the better the price. And this is obviously called FOMO, or fear of missing out. And this is exactly relevant for prisoner's dilemma here as well, because it makes sense for you to adopt as early as possible, and rational for you to adopt Bitcoin instead of ignoring it. And prisoner's dilemmas mean a long decision-making process where it's rational for you to have the heuristic tit for tat. Which means, okay, if my counterparty is cooperative, it is most productive for myself to be also cooperative, as long as my counterparty remains cooperative. And this is what the prisoner's dilemma is saying, and obviously leads to, okay, it makes more sense for us to adopt Bitcoin. It's less risky to invest in Bitcoin, have a Bitcoin stake, than to not have a Bitcoin stake.
And how do you see that playing out in terms of mining and the geographical distribution?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite concepts in Bitcoin, that with proof of work, yes, you might argue that it's inefficient, but energy on this planet is always highly decentralized and highly distributed. Yeah, and this was one of the main concepts where Satoshi's idea to combine proof of work setup with a decentralized network and create a digital currency like Bitcoin out of it, is that energy is and always will be decentralized on this planet. There's no single source of energy, obviously, even if you consider external and sustainable energy sources like the sun. And this is super important for the decentralization of the network, because the unique selling point of Bitcoin is the decentralization. No other network is decentralized like the energy distribution globally leads to utilization by mining. And hence the mining operations is geographically distributed. And if you divide the world in political blocks, then each block, like for instance, the Western and the Eastern Hemisphere, Northern, Southern, G7 or G8 against BRICS Plus, divided whatever you want. But the idea is that there will be a need for their own mining operation, because in theory, any miner could reject the transaction. Now, we've seen this discussion regarding the recent OFAC sanction lists that have been applied to several cryptocurrency projects. OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets Control by the US, and they actually provide some sanctioned lists. And if you're on this list, or public key, for instance, is on the list, no one has. And there always will be miners that are not interested in having this kind of compliance. Okay. Because you say, okay, it is an apolitical network, and if it's an apolitical cryptocurrency, then it can't be sanctioned, can't be censored. And this is assured by geographical distribution of miners, because you want to ensure, if you, let's say you're China, or you're, for instance, India, and they decide to have a small portion of the trade settled in Bitcoin, they have to ensure that the next block contains their Bitcoin transaction. And so they're starting their own mining operations. So this is exactly the geostrategical distribution we are all talking about. And seeing this, the United States and the European Union cannot sleepwalking around and do nothing.
So there are lots of talks about the BRICS and their own currency. Do you actually see that coming?
Actually, I think the BRICS states tried that to create own competing currency. And to this day, they actually didn't come to an agreement. So far, they have a real option because we all know that the BRICS states are not only friends, right? They are rivals as well. Look at China and India, for instance. It's clear that there's no single reserve currency that they could agree on. There were discussions that they want to establish a basket. Yes, basket of rupiah and the ruble and yuan, etc. But it's quite complicated, and they don't have this swift opponent that could actually settle the transaction amongst all BRICS states. So I think they will adopt Bitcoin as a global settlement layer for foreign trade because it's a system up and running. You have a hard asset, and it makes the most sense if you want to use it on short notice.
Okay, and how do you see that topic progressing? How do you think they are going to move forward?
So what we see are actually three initiatives at the same time in the most BRICS countries, at least I consider. The first is they allowed Bitcoin as private property. The second is the mining infrastructure investments, especially in Russia and China. China, despite their ban back then, their mining ban, never stopped mining completely. So no one knows where the hash rate comes from, but we all know that there's a decent percentage of hash rates still coming from China, despite this officially not allowed to mine Bitcoin in China. And this means obviously there is mining ongoing. There's an relevant infrastructure investment. Also, the UAE decided to invest heavily in mining infrastructure. And this third point is some kind of strategic reserve plan. So Brazil recently announced a bill that would create a Bitcoin strategic reserve. We see that as relevant. The market sees that as relevant.
So I think you already touched on this, but it's really interesting to understand. So Toshi established proof of work in a way that it will be always decentralized. Could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Because energy is distributed on this planet, and so the resources are also distributed on this planet. This means that it's a very, very high likelihood that mining operations will be decentralized amongst this planet with no geographic emphasis. Obviously, yes, right now you can argue a significant portion of the hash rate comes from Texas. Okay. But before that, we had a significant portion out of mainland China. Okay, yes, there might be local sweet spots in terms of energy usage and grid stability, where mining is in particular used, but it is, despite that, it is still globally distributed. Even if you say, okay, all China and all US miners will be following sanction lists, even then you have smaller miners somewhere else, and you can't stop that, right? And this is also why proof of stake POS networks won't work in the long run. Okay, let me elaborate on that. You never can be sure to use the right chain and not a synthetic chain faked by the network if you only have proof of stake, because there is no thermodynamically secured chain. Because in proof of stake, it's just a connection of votes amongst the distribution networks. And if you sync up your new chain, you'd never know, okay, is this the real chain or is it just a connection of chains? Okay, a connection of blocks, I have to say, that are distributed synthetically. You have no proof, hence the name proof of work, that it is really the core chain of blocks. Yeah. And this is why proof of stake is insecure in the long run.
So going back to the strategic coin reserve, do you think it's a good or it's a bad thing, you personally, as a Bitcoin?
Yeah, a clear, I don't know, right? Because in the end, everything is good for Bitcoin. If it's adopted, good. We certainly will see higher prices then. If it's not adopted, good. We have more time to stack more sets, right? So I will see eventually in the trajectory of Bitcoin adoption, this is something sooner or later will be. adopted also by major nation states. And yeah, everything will be good. If it's adopted this year, good. If not, also